Has Angela Merkel caved in to hardliners or once again quietly demolished a political rival? We're going to be reading the fine print on a late-night compromise with her conservative interior minister on new transit centers for migrants at the Bavarian border. Seems there's a catch in the countries where the migrants first registered when they enter Europe will have to have agreed to take them back. FYI, Italy's already saying no. Austria's pushing back. So is it simply political theater? Theater that will run all the way to Bavaria's regional elections in October? And has Merkel won, or is her grand coalition still on very tenuous grounds? Now, on the day the new hardline Austrian chancellor visits Strasbourg to mark his country's 6-month rotating presidency of the EU beginning, what future for the center-right in Germany and in Europe and for their ideals? We've chronicled the demise of the center-left in many a country. But it seems now that conservatives, the traditional ones, are on the back foot in places like France, Spain, Italy, arguably even the UK. Are the ideas espoused by Merkel for the chop in Europe? Today in the France 24 debate, is it always in the end Merkel wins? We're talking about it with us, Nino Galletti, Paris director of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. Thank you for joining us. Thanks as well to commentator Jakob Hessler. Welcome back to the show, sir. From Strasbourg and the European Parliament, Terry Rentke, member of the Parliament for the Greens. Thank you for speaking with us. And we're joined by Pepijn Bergson, policy analyst at the Economist Intelligence Unit. He's in London. Thank you for joining the France 24 debate. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Ich bleibe, I'm staying. That's the front page of Germany's best-selling tabloid Bild. It quotes Horst Seehofer. So, Germany's three-way grand coalition between Angela Merkel's CDU, the Bavarian CSU party of Seehofer, and the Social Democrats stays together, at least for now. Catherine Viette has more.
Crisis averted as members of Germany's coalition government reach a compromise deal on migration.
After tough negotiations between CDU and the CSU, the two parties have reached a deal. We have a clear agreement on how to avoid future illegal immigration at the German-Austrian border.
German Interior Minister Horst Seehofer, leader of the Bavarian Christian Social Union, dropped his threat to quit after receiving assurances that Germany would enact tighter border controls. The New Deal will see the German government set up transit centers on Germany's border with Austria to evaluate asylum seekers, sending back those that have already applied for protection in another EU country.
That's how we keep the spirit of partnership within the European Union, and at the same time we navigate and organize a secondary migration. This is and was very important for me, and I think we reached a good compromise today after days of difficult negotiations.
Merkel continues to deal with fallout from her decision to keep Germany's borders open during the 2015 mass influx of migrants to Europe. Public anger and fear over the migrants helped the far-right Alternative for Germany party gain a foothold in parliament and threatens the CSU and Bavarian state polls, leading to the party's new harder line on immigration.
You know, Galletti, has Merkel won outright, or is she weakened?
Well, I don't think that she is weakened. I think she's stronger than she was before. There were some discussions and, before even members of the CDU in the German parliament were thinking that Merkel should change a little bit the migration politics. But the way how the CSU was behaving, that really closed the rows of CDU, and now she's stronger than she was before.
Stronger than she was before? Jakob Hessler, you agree?
Well, I would say, well, yes and no. In her own ranks, certainly yes. But I think in the historical perspective, what we're seeing is that some of the very long-standing, shall I say, almost amalgam of the center-right, the sort of Christian Catholic center-right, and the more right-wing national people, which after the war Adenauer actually managed to hold together and create as a bloc. That bloc is today threatened. And it's that threat which comes from the right. It has happened before. There were the Republikaner, so it's not the first time. And the question, if you take a bigger picture, is how can the conservatives maintain their monopoly on the right? And they've always, I think, maneuvered between, when they had to, they went a little bit more to the right to squish who was ever there. And I think that's what they're trying to do. And so in that sense, there is a turning point at the moment, and Austria could serve as an example, where it's not clear whether that model will survive. But in the moment, I would agree with my colleague that she came out of this stronger in her own ranks. Yes.
Pepijn Bergson, you agree that there is a crack within the center right between those that are Christian Democrats and those that are more nationalist?
Well, I think to a certain extent there's always been different wings within the Christian Democratic bloc. What's really important at the moment is, of course, that threat that's coming from the Alternative for Germany, the AfD, especially in Bavaria ahead of the election. I think that's pulling sort of the right wing of especially the CSU further to the right and trying to really get the rest of the Christian Democratic bloc along. But there's a big question whether that split that's showing up a little bit now, especially on the migration issue, whether that will hold, for instance, after the October election, when it's still in both parties, the CSU and the CDU, to continue working together.
Seehofer, the CSU Interior Minister, used to be the party leader, feeling the heat from his own ranks. The man who succeeded him as Bavaria's president, Markus Söder. We could show you images of him inaugurating on Monday the Bavarian Border Police Coordination Center. And it was interesting because going into Monday night's meeting, he was pressuring Seehofer to tone it down. But for the former leader of the Social Democrats, remember there's another party to this grand coalition, the SPD. They're both the CSU and the CDU are to blame.
We first have to see what Seehofer's plan looks like. Until now it was kept secret, now it's public. However, I think that it does not change the fact that Mr. Seehofer and the CSU took the German government hostage for weeks. Let me say very openly that since Willy Brandt, we know that there must not even be a suspicion that the German Chancellor is open to blackmail. Seehofer blackmailed the government and he blackmailed Chancellor Merkel, which is an unbelievable occurrence.
Yeah, allusion there to history where former Chancellor of Germany and his acquaintances with people from East Germany. Let me ask you, Terry Reintke, your thoughts on the political drama that's played out over the past 24 hours?
Well, we have definitely seen a political theater that Germany hasn't encountered in the last years in the same extent. And I would definitely say that this has touched upon something that the Conservatives have always stood for, and that was stability and responsibility. And Horst Seehofer has definitely not shown any of this in the last days. He has basically put the interest inside of his own party above any German or European interest. And I think that this will not only damage Angela Merkel, but this is damaging Europe. And the last time we have seen a similar internal crisis in a conservative party, in a conservative governing party in the European Union, we know the outcome, it was Brexit. So I think the situation is still deeply worrying and there are no solutions at hand at the moment.
And what should the Social Democrats do? Stay in the coalition or leave?
I believe they should reject the proposal as it is on the table now. They are a partner in this coalition. And yes, if there is no compromise to be found, and if it would mean to swallow something like this, then I think the Social Democrats should stay hard, because we are not only talking about a humanitarian asylum system here that the European Union still needs to deliver on. We are talking about fundamental rights of people, and we are talking about the future of the European Union. And I think it's about time that the Social Democrats stood up for that.
Nino Galletti, is it a Faustian pact that Merkel has signed with the setting up of these transit centers?
Well, I don't think so. But coming back to your question, if the Social Democrats should stay or should leave, Germans want a stable government. And so they should now, starting to govern, the Social Democrats with the Christian Democrats and the Christian Social Party. And Germans want stability. So go on. And don't think about changing the coalition.
Even if it means the setting up of these transit centers?
Yeah, sure. That's a compromise, so we have to use it.
Jakob Hessler?
Well, I think I can't answer for the Social Democrats. I think we have to step back and look at one fact, which is in 2018 we have 95% less migrants than we had in 2015, when in addition most of them went to Germany. So there's 95% less. That's the first fact. And the second fact is, though, that contrary to that, the perception of people is that there are these huge inflows and they have been fueled by all kinds of movements which are wrong. Now, to me, the real question is, so what do you do when you're faced with something which is obviously wrong and which is an obvious misinformation, but where at the same time everyone who's ignored what people feel gets punished at the urns in the election? So to me, and that's where I think Merkel may have won. But what the real issue is where is the vital answer to where is the person?
So you're saying it is a Faustian pact?
No, I'm not saying it's a Faustian pact. I don't think she has any choice. And I think it's, given where she stands, it's the right thing to do. And I think in the short term, the Social Democrats, yes, I think they should stay in that coalition, because otherwise it will create a huge mess, and Europe at this moment cannot deal with another problem country on top. So, but my preference, if I say, is a very instrumental one. Let's put it that way.
Pepin Bergson, you agree that, well, it's effectively what Jakob is saying is that it's politically impossible right now to argue for open borders in Europe?
Absolutely. And I would always add to that it's really important to point out that even the 2015 situation, Angela Merkel did not really invite all those people in. They were already in Europe, sort of knocking at the door. So the policy that has come out of Germany has never been for Europe to open its doors. And I think the perception that was the case has played a large role in really the current political situation and creating sort of where we are now, in terms that a lot of people are worried about a repetition of that situation. And I think that's where a lot of the talk of processing asylum claims outside the EU, for instance, comes from, is that people are really afraid of what could happen in a couple of years' time if something like 2015 would be repeated. And that's going to continue to drive this sort of political dynamic for really the foreseeable future.
All right, what was fleshed out late on Monday in Berlin is having a domino effect on other parts of Europe. Earlier at the European Parliament, the Austrian Chancellor calling for more clarity from Berlin. This as his government in Vienna warned of tighter border controls with Slovenia and Italy should Germany go through with its Bavaria Transit Center plan. Sebastian Kurz speaking as Austria takes over the rotating presidency of the EU until the end of the year.
Our motto is a Europe that protects. Specifically, we want to focus on the three main priorities. First of all, security and the fight against illegal migration.
Terry Reinke, you were there earlier in the European Parliament. What do you make of it?
Well, I must say that this has again shown how the solution that is on the table right now, the compromise that the Conservatives have come up with in Germany, is actually not a solution at all. Because immediately, not only the Austrians, but also other member states have actually rejected these kind of proposals. And I think that this shows the real question that we should be discussing about, and that is what kind of European asylum system do we actually want in the future? And I think the Council is, also with the outcome of the last week's meeting, is deflecting from this question, because they have not been delivering on the question, what kind of reform of the Dublin regulation do they want? The European Parliament has positioned itself, and we would direly need these kind of answers, because in the end we all want more clarity, we all want more orders, we all want more stability, but at the moment, also with this proposal on the table, we will not get that, and that is what the Council actually needs to do.
And what if Austria goes through and does tighten the border with Italy and Slovenia? How should Germany react?
Well, then Schengen is dead.
Terry Reinke?
Sorry, I didn't understand your question. Could you repeat that?
If Austria goes through with what they're threatening, which is tighter border controls with Slovenia and Italy, how should Germany react?
Well, I would definitely say that it should be a common interest of all members of the European Union to keep Schengen and to defend Schengen. And this is why it's so important that we come up with a common asylum system, because the question of secondary migration only comes up in situations when there is an unclarity, when asylum seekers go from one member state to another member state. And that is why we actually need the proposals that have been proposed by the European Parliament to actually be put into practice. And there we have a lot of work to do, because there are still member states who are actually not following up on these decisions that have been taken. We need a relocation system. We need a fair distribution of refugees within the European Union, and that's what we should be working on, and not the question on how we can deal with the Bavarian elections that are coming up this autumn.
Nino Galetti, you agree?
Yes, I agree, but you have to do that step by step, and it's very easy to be in the European Parliament and to say one should do that and one should do another thing. I think we have seen that at the summit last week, and they are really working hard, they are going on, and there will be some solutions, but it takes time.
Well, the German Chancellor claiming that she had gotten voluntary bilateral agreements when it comes to relocating migrants with states, some of which said they haven't had any agreement with Germany so far. Again, we're back to the issue of is it just politically impossible to agree on anything on this right now?
I don't think so. Well, it takes time, and we all have the hope that that will function one day. But it takes time, and that will not go by from one moment to the other.
I think it's the time, and that's the real issue, which is that time is the one thing that, in the eyes of many people, we don't have, but which I think we do have. I mean, objectively speaking, as there is no imminent danger, no country gets run over. It's just bullshit. There are no millions of people who are running in the streets and, I don't know, eating our food, taking our doctors, taking our schools, etc. Sort of Brexit panic type style thing. But what the issue is, we need the time to sort these things out, and I think to get trust. Because now you have an Italian government that is the most unlikely combinations of things. You have southern, rather left-wing people, but who are just overwhelmed by the fact that they happen to be the place where all these people arrive. And you have northern, other people, which are not actually where the people arrive, who just are using this because it serves their agenda. But the fact that for the first time, you recognize that for Italy and Greece, it is actually tough. They are countries that have been gone through years of austerity imposed mostly by Germany. And in addition, now we're saying, look, now we want you to deal with this. It's not really our problem. You can't say that. And so the recognition, which is they have a problem and it's legitimate to say they need to deal and we need to help them. That's how it starts. And then we can start and build. The fact then that the Hungarians say we don't want to take any, let's solve that in the second step. The first thing is actually figure out what it is actually that would help the Italians and the Greek to better cope with the situation. It's certainly not to just send ship backs, because it's very clear the death rate of ships has gone up. It was 1 in 10 who died in 2017 who escaped. It's now almost it's 43%. There's another 1,000 people who just drowned trying to reach Italy. So that is a truly unacceptable situation. So let's start there. Let's be pragmatic and let's help them, I think.
Pepijn Bergson, right now, Europe is again at one of these crossroads over this issue. And it's again, as Jakob was saying, it's about sovereignty, isn't it? It's about, do you solve these problems at the national level or at the pan-European level? At this point in time, is the EU losing that battle?
Well, yes, when the debate goes like this, and what we're seeing now with country after country basically threatening to close its borders, there is a risk of that. But at the end of the day, this is a European problem that can only be solved by Europe. The idea that there is a large number of people coming in through Italy, and they wouldn't, by some way, make their way up north to Germany or to the Netherlands or to Sweden, is of course just incorrect. So this is Europe's problem, and this will have to be solved on a European level. Of course, the way that we've gone about it at the moment with, for instance, the CSU creating this crisis recently, and thereby forcing that, for instance, that migration mini summit 2 weeks ago. That's not the way to solve this, because this needs more time. These are really big questions, and these are not going to be solved overnight at an additional EU summit.
An additional EU summit, and again, there's two aspects to this. There is the Austrian aspect to it. Now with Austria having such a loud voice, we've been talking about Matteo Salvini, the Italian interior minister, but it's been really Sebastian Kurz's day. Here you're seeing images of drills that were done a little over a week ago by Austrian police and armed forces, this at the Slovenian border, to repel an eventual, quote, mass invasion of asylum seekers and migrants. At the European Parliament, the Austrian Chancellor was reminded of it.
Well, good.
Recently, 700 heavily armed people with helicopters were at the Austrian-Slovenian border. My government is against this development in Austria. Armed forces at the borders within Europe, is this what we want? That's not the Europe we want. That is not the Europe we're in favor of.
Nino Galletti, we had the President of the European Commission today praising Sebastian Kurz because of a platform within his coalition government with the far right, which is pro-EU on a lot of issues, on all the issues except this one, of course. Did Jean-Claude Juncker strike the right tone?
Well, I don't have to give advice to Jean-Claude Juncker, but I think, first of all, the Austrian government is working. That's good. It wasn't clear in the beginning if it really works or not. And on the other hand, like Hungarian 3 years before, someone has to defend the borders of Europe. And the borders of Europe aren't in Germany or in France. They are in Greece, in Italy, and maybe in Hungary. So somebody.
But do they need to be staging drills for mass arrivals of migrants?
You know, these are pictures that are awful. Nobody wants to see that. But you have to defend the borders. How do you do it?
Terry Reinke?
Well, I would say that we are having this debate based on the assumption that all people involved in it actually want to find solutions to the problems that we are facing with regards to refugees. But I don't buy that anymore. Actually, it's people like Viktor Orban and also Matteo Salvini, the FPÖ in Austria, and maybe after this crisis we can count Horst Seehofer into this group of people who are massively profiting from constantly discussing about how this is not working. And I think that we have to be aware of the fact that yes, things take time, but who is actually profiting from having these very long, very painful debates, constantly challenging European law, European fundamental values, fundamental rights of different groups of people within the European Union. And I think we have to look at that. And we have to be aware that there is an authoritarian wave coming over Europe. And I think when we are assessing this situation, we also have to call out on all those people who are actually not discussing real solutions, but who are just using this for their political, very often hateful rhetorics. And we have to be clear that if we follow this kind of line, we will never come to a conclusion. We will never actually have a system that will work, but we will build a fortress Europe that will piece by piece undermine all fundamental values that this union once stood for. And I don't want to live in that Europe.
Nino Galletti, should Angela Merkel be calling out Sebastian Kurz over his policies when it comes to migration?
Well, she's the Chancellor of Germany. He's the Chancellor of...
Nino Galletti.
Okay. She's the Chancellor of Germany. He's the Chancellor of Austria. She don't have to tell him how he's managing, because he was elected by the Austrians and he knows very well what he's doing. But they have to find a solution, the two together.
Yeah, because it is tricky, Terry Reinke. You don't want to be seen, as we saw the spat between France's president and Italy's interior minister over the last couple of weeks. A foreign nation can't be lecturing the Austrians.
Well, I don't want to be lecturing anyone. I just think we have to take a political stance. And I also demand this from the German Chancellor. And I think that she has been doing this too little in the past days. I know that she's in a very, very difficult situation. But at the same time, she's also the last hope of a lot of people who want to live in a Europe based on these fundamental values. And I think that getting blackmailed by people like Horst Seehofer is not going to show the strength that we actually need in these really hard times that we are facing right now.
Opinion polls show that Germans squarely side with Angela Merkel on this one. Some surprised that Seehofer is still in the government. What are the options for Merkel if it all becomes untenable? Just a reminder, back in September, her party fared the worst in a general election since the war. There's the makeup of the parliament after the election that took place back in September. Actually, let me begin with you on this one, Terry Rentke. If it does really become untenable with the CSU, should the Greens enter the government with the CDU and the SPD?
Well, I would certainly say that there have to be a lot of conditions put to this. You know that we were in coalition talks beforehand. We were not the one who were blocking going into coalition with the Conservatives and the Liberals before. Again, there will be talks to be made. I just think that the Greens are not ready to go into a government under all conditions, and that has to be absolutely clear from the start.
Well, unfortunately, the Jamaica coalition,
with the FPD,
which I was actually
and the
a great fan of. I thought that would have been a refreshing new thing, until it was torpedoed, again for similar personal reasons, by the head of the FDP, which is similar to Horst Seehofer, had nothing to do with any political issues. He just brought up new issues so he could torpedo the negotiations. But that would not have probably not solved the problem, because on many of these issues, he has sort of also moved into the AfD territory, his party, not the people necessarily who elect FDP, but there has been a move. So I'm not sure it would have created more stability, and in the long run, I personally think we have no choice but to now, durchhalten, as they say in German.
Let me ask you this question, Nino Galletti.
Can I just say one thing? Because I think
Terry
in general... Sorry. I just think that if we follow down this line where everybody is just taking decisions with regards to where their own political career should go to at some point, or whether they want to become Prime Minister of Bavaria or any other state in Germany, or be it in any country, I think this European project is going to fail. And I think that if this is going to be the criteria on how we choose who we trust politically, it's a very, very wrong way that we are walking down. So I think we really need to come back to the table and discuss about issues, because in the end we are elected to find solutions to problems of the citizens that have elected us.
Nino Galletti, building a coalition means getting people who are like-minded together. We've seen how the coalition in Italy is a bit awkward. The coalition in Germany right now is a bit awkward. We've seen in France how the political landscape was blown up by the elections of 2017, with Emmanuel Macron picking off voters from both the center-left and the center-right. Is that the future for Germany as well? That perhaps nowadays the CDU has more in common with the Greens and the SPD than it does with the CSU?
No. Well, CDU has a lot in common with the CSU. That was so in the past, that will be so in the future. But the vast majority of CDU and of CSU wanted to make a Jamaica coalition in the last autumn. Like my colleague said already, it was the Liberal Party that didn't want that. But
hang on, you're based here in France, and you've seen how Macron has thrown up in the air the whole concept of left versus right. Could the same thing happen in Germany, where perhaps there's the center ground needs to be staked out in a different fashion?
So, because the party system in Germany is very stable. That was not the fact in France in the year 2017.
Pepijn Bergson, you agree?
Yeah, I think if you're looking for where Germany would be moving towards politically, I think you're much more looking towards sort of northern countries like the Netherlands, where sort of the political spectrum is fragmented quite a lot. And that's, I think, what happened in 2017 as well. You know, more parties almost than ever in the Bundestag, and that will make creating coalitions even more difficult. That doesn't mean that it's by definition impossible to make policy. The Netherlands, for instance, and the Nordic countries have been able to do that for years. It will just take some time getting used to that.
So hang on, if I hear you correctly, Pepijn, you're saying that the political forecast for Germany is instability, the likes of which we know more in Latin countries?
No, absolutely not. It's just a political spectrum that's a bit more fragmented. I wouldn't say that the Nordic countries or the Netherlands have that kind of political instability. It's just something that maybe Germany wasn't quite used to, having these many parties in parliament and needing bigger coalitions. And that sometimes leaves you vulnerable to positions where we are now, where one party can hold the rest hostage. But that's just part of politics. I wouldn't be too worried about that. If other countries
Terry
can do it,
Reinke
why
is
can't
worried
Germany
about it.
do
She's saying that everybody's losing their ideals as a result.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm worried about it. I just think it's a changing situation. And what we have been seeing is that this needs maybe also new forms of having political debates. And I would call for having political debates based on content rather than on ego. And that's what we have seen in the last days, a political debate completely driven by different egos. And I think we need to move back to talk about facts.
Pepijn Bergson?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think over the last sort of decade, especially under sort of Chancellor Merkel, there hasn't been that much political debate in Germany. Arguably not quite enough. So getting a bit more political debate would be a good thing. Of course, there's a question of how it's done. And the last couple of weeks are an example of how not to do this. But a bit more exchange of ideas, a bit more debate. Like we've been seeing in the Bundestag, for instance, over the past couple of months, that's actually not a negative thing.
So just getting back to the topic at the top, what's Angela Merkel's future like? Is she going to be around for a long while yet?
I wouldn't expect her to go for another term. She'll remain under pressure over the coming years, not just from the CSU, but I think increasingly from people within her own party, people who want to be the next Angela Merkel. So we'll get a lot more political instability still by German standards, of course, so it won't be that bad. But this is the start of this government was the beginning of the end of the Merkel era, of course.
Jakob Hessler, forgive me, I'm going to rub salt in the wound here. I'm going to talk football for a second here.
Please.
Germany, as you know, went out in the group phase at the World Cup, and yet we have the news coming out today that they're keeping Joachim Löw, their coach. And people in the newsroom, French people in the newsroom, were like, wow, they lose, but they keep the coach. The Germans don't like to change the form that much, it seems.
It's not that they don't like to change the form. I think there is a sense that sometimes bad stuff happens and just firing the guy at the head may not solve the problem or the underlying issue underneath. And I think that's very true also in this situation. And I think, ironically though, and that's to your point about what's after Merkel, it's precisely the fact that she's more or less indicated that she's not going to run another time, which increases actually all the ego-driven issues that we're now seeing, because everyone is jockeying for who's going to be the crown prince or crown princess, because of course everyone expects, so at one point, you know, it's a they're all court gesturing. And the problem is that in modern times, this all happens on Twitter and in the public. It's not that they meet in some smoky room somewhere in some Bavarian monastery somewhere and hit at each other and they talk all night. No, this is all now out in the open, and we haven't found a way of dealing with that yet.
And it's a great topic of conversation. We should do a debate about it. Many thanks, Jakob Hessler. I want to thank as well for joining us, Nino Galetti. I want to thank for joining us from Strasbourg at the European Parliament, Terry Rentke and Pepijn Bergson in London. Stay with us. Our World Cup Daily is next.